Hey everyone, do you think this is a traditional painting or a digital painting? All guesses in, and it is a traditional painting, painted on wood and everything. But wait, hang on. That was a trick, I apologize. It's actually a digital painting. I had you going for a second though, didn't I? So this video is chock full of tips for achieving interesting, natural, and even traditional looking digital brushwork. The thing about traditional media is, it's organic. When I put a watercolor stroke down here, all kinds of subtle varieties happen. For example, there's more pigment where I started the stroke. While that wash is still wet, here's another color. And look at how the water and pigments interact, giving me color variety for free. Wetness can modify edges. And here's some clean water being spattered in. And look at how those droplets diffuse and grow and affect the pigment. With these watercolor washes dry now, I can put on additional washes. This wet over dry application will darken the washes underneath, but this time hard edges are preserved. Clean water here can help soften edges and create gradients. Of course, we can always switch media, grab some colored pencils. I love a colored pencil's granular texture, contrasting with the smoothness of a wash. Also, I really like using the hardness of a pencil to emphasize edges and shapes. Here's a stiff bristle brush and a palette knife. I can spatter the paint and get different sizes and spacings. Let's switch media again and grab some acrylic paint. The thickness here is maybe the most notable thing, but as that paint runs out, we get a difference of both opacity and texture. And while the paint is still wet and with a dirty brush, I can get all kinds of interesting pigment mixtures and textures. Here's a frizzy brush just with water on it, and while that paint is still wet, I can start diffusing edges and running colors together. Ooh, and look at this, here's an airbrush. I can glaze a super thin layer over everything. I enjoy changing colors on the airbrush, using masking tools with it. Traditional media, if you've never tried it, is tons of fun. It's fun because variety happens naturally, and it tends to be easier to create interesting brushwork. Now, if you know what you're going for, you can achieve very similar looks digitally. So today I'm firing up the latest version of Corel Painter. You know it's good when there's cats on the splash screen. Anyway, I'll go make a new canvas, and one cool thing I can choose here is the paper. This is a library of textures that your brushes will react to. And brushes are really the bread and butter of Painter. It comes preloaded with every type of media you can imagine. The categories are on the left column and the corresponding brushes are on the right. So I want to show you a helpful exercise for improving your digital brushwork. And I want to be very clear, you can do this with any app. This is a photograph I took of an actual piece of watercolor paper. I'll copy and paste it onto my canvas. I'll name the layer Surface, then go up here and set it to Multiply mode, decrease its opacity to about 60%, and finally lock the layer so I can't paint on it. Now, in most apps, you just make a new layer and start painting, but Painter has different types of layers corresponding to different media. Painter is smart. If I go and grab a watercolor brush and start painting with it, I get a new watercolor layer automatically. So I'll put a few brush strokes down, and look at how it's physically reacting with the paper. Now Painter will treat this as a wet wash until I choose to dry it. It's one of the many benefits of digital media. So changing my color up and adding to this wet wash here. For this exercise, keep things abstract. Don't try and draw anything. If I want to dry this wash, I just right click and there's an option here. And now when I add more watercolor strokes, it'll overlay on top of those washes rather than mix into them. Up here at the top, I can dial in more paper texture, as well as access the unique parameters of my chosen brush. You can also modify its shape. So with those alterations, this same brush now looks like this. And already I'm producing that natural variety that I'm after. Alright, so let's add a different medium to this. I'll just make a regular new layer here. Then I'll go up to the pencils category, and I like this 6B brush. There's enough thickness to it to see the grain in the stroke, which of course provides contrast against the smoother watercolor. Alright, let's expand our texture palette and get some spatter in here. I'll go up to airbrushes and grab this sprinkle brush. No matter which software I use, it's important to me that the fingerprint of the brush be not obviously repetitious. What you're looking for is subtle changes from brushstroke to brushstroke that throw off that digital scent. Now again, a reminder, you don't specifically need Painter to do that. However, Painter right out of the box does an excellent job with this stuff. It makes getting natural and interesting brushwork easy and fun. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and collapse my painting layers down, and I'll make a new thick paint layer. Then I'll go and grab one of these thick paint brushes, and while this new texture is interesting, it's too uniformly opaque. I want it to interact more with the painting beneath. So I can right-click the layer and convert it to a thick paint layer, which just means my thick paint brushes will interact with the painting I've already done. So to complete this little brushwork exercise, you just want to get to the point where you feel like you've created a full range of textures, edges, played with various brush types, and generally have something that contains enough variety to hold your interest. The late, great Richard Schmid said something I'll always remember. He said that painting is often less about the physical subject matter and more about how you filter it through the language of painting. And this is the point where you want to look at what you've done and analyze the visual vocabulary you've created. For example, this area here. I see a shape that looks like this. Now, the key is, it's not defined like this. It's not totally solid. There's a hard edge here, and then the shape continues with soft edges. Here's a painting by Daniel Keyes. This painting actually looks like something, but the visual vocabulary is the same. Looking at that green pumpkin in the middle there, the left side of the silhouette looks like this. But look closer, it's not totally solid. It too is made of hard edges and soft edges. There's a hard edge there, interchanging with a soft edge there. Then the hard edge picks up again here, and passes the baton to the soft edge here. It can be difficult to practice painting form and light and practice your brushwork at the same time. That's why I recommend these abstract exercises. Alright, let's keep analyzing. See this lumpy area here? What color would you say that is? Probably you'd say it's blue, right? Okay, it reads as blue to me too. But let's look closer. Here's a sampling of a bunch of colors that are all in that area. Now let's remove the painting. Would you still blanket term all that as blue? Probably not. Some swatches are blue, but even there's different types of blue, and other swatches are not blue at all. So when painting color, consider using your brushwork to kind of weave color or layer color. I want this to eventually look blue, which of course it doesn't yet. But I'll start swinging this color around now, and I'll pick one of Painter's oily brushes which has a nice bit of smear to it, and I'll start working into this color. The brushwork is important. I don't just want it to be 100% opaque. I want evidence of that warm seeping through the cools. That'll help give your color that unpredictable yet fresh look that we tend to admire in good painters. You know, where the color feels like it's never really standing still, like it's always vibrating around a bit. Anyway, then just keep working at this until it looks blue to you. And that's all there is to it. That's another quick exercise you can try. Okay, so I want to point something out about brushwork. Brushwork contributes to the emotional part of painting. What's far more fundamental is shapes. For example, this shape defines the side plane of her head. So that's the fundamental thing we're after. Your brushwork is in service of that. And there are so many possibilities. I could do a very straightforward approach like this, or I could be more experimental and build the shape up with multiple brushes and multiple passes. I could try filling the shape in very simplistically, and then imbue it with artistic brushwork from there. A great way to shake up your brushwork is put the shape in by painting around it, producing the shape as a negative shape. So long as you adhere to the shape, you could use whatever brush or brushwork you want. Even a cheesy image hose like this will still work. I'm reminded of this painting by Craig Mullins. We can all see that tree right there, but actually zoom in on it, and that entire section is not so different than the exercises we've been doing so far. So let's fire up Painter again and flex its brushwork muscles a bit. Starting off here with that same 6B pencil brush, and I still have that paper texture layer over everything set to multiply mode, which I find really helps give your digital brushwork that traditional feel. I'm gonna switch my brush now to this oily Conte brush. I want this to be smooth and a little smudgy, so I'll drop the grain a little bit, then just work right into my pencil layer, smudging and blending strokes. Now, we just talked about shapes. My goal here is to define two shapes: an average light shape, responsible for all of the light, and an average shadow shape, responsible for all of the shadows. And because those shapes are so important, I want my brush to be very reliable. A little bit of personality is okay, a little smudging here and there, but not too much. I feel like if you're just sketching around, you could be done right here. But to start the color process, I'll switch over now to one of my favorite watercolor brushes, the grainy wash brush. Of course, Painter makes me a new watercolor layer by default, and I'll glaze in some wet washes here. Just like real watercolor, it'll lay transparently over top of the pencil. And Painter does an exceptional job at the watercolor simulation here. Just like real watercolor, you can combine all kinds of colors knowing that they'll pleasantly diffuse together in the wet into wet wash. Now, no matter which app I'm using, I do like to change my brush often. So this is a different watercolor brush now. This one leaves behind those characteristic pigmented edges. This may look a little strange right now, but this is just an underlayer. This texture facilitates that abstract interest we talked about earlier. Also though, these brushes are just a joy to play with, and I firmly believe that joy should factor into your process. Anyway, now I want to brush with less texture so I can go back and tighten up the drawing a bit. I'll use this grainy, medium hard airbrush for that. And this is just a bit of contrast to help define shapes where needed. And while I'm here, I'll grab that spattery airbrush, play with that a little bit. And now I think I'd like to build up some thicker paint texture, so I'll dig into the Oils Bravura section. The word bravura refers to a thick, direct oil painting technique. Now, I don't want to cover this with opaque paint. I just want to build up that opacity and texture where I think it feels right. And again, the way you learn what feels right to you, apart from looking at a lot of art yourself, is by doing those abstract brush exercises. Now, of course, as I'm painting along here, I'm always thinking about shapes and form and edges and light. In fact, Painter's Navigator window here is really useful. It's got this little toggle for displaying in grayscale. So in the throes of emotional brushwork, that little display window really helps me also stay focused on the fundamentals. But anyway, back to brushes. This is really cool. This is the Dirty Water brush. Remember back here when I spattered that water onto the pigment and it lifted the value? That's what I'm doing here. It has this interesting ghostly effect, while still somehow preserving your shapes and values enough to be readable. And immediately to counteract that, I'm going back over things with a very directional brush. With all these brushes to choose from, Painter, thankfully, comes with a My Favorites checkbox. A nice handy way of sorting your toolset to the most common selections. This is my favorite 6B pencil brush, which I've used several times already in this video. It's a great tool to add crispness to your edges. Of course, I'll do that only where I think it's needed. I spent a lot of money on my colored pencil selection in real life, but even that pales in comparison to the selection you have with digital media. And I just want to pause quickly here to say there is a link in the pinned comment where you can get $100 off Painter. I highly recommend you give this app a shot. Anyway, to finish off this painting, let's go through the Tonal Control Equalize filter. You can adjust your levels and gamma for a bit of extra punch. I'll spend a second to dial this in, and there we go. Let's call that finished and move on to the next one. Let's try something more cartoony, like a character design for an animated film. I'm blocking in some shapes and gesture with a marker brush. I really like how this marker brush kind of looks like it's dying or dried out. Using the My Favorites filter to quickly navigate to my pencil brush, start sketching this guy in. Layer-wise, I'm just working on a single layer, although I do have that paper texture above, as I've always done in this video, but the drawing itself is happening on just one layer. And you get to watch me dig myself into a hole with this hand pose here. Don't like that? Let's try again. Hands are always tough to draw, and I know how to draw hands. I've done a whole video about it. But despite that, hands remain one of the most difficult parts of the pose. I think it's because they contain so much character and attitude, and any tiny little change can affect that. Not to mention the complexity of the form. Anyway, even though this is a drawing and not a painting, I'm still using brushwork. And the thing that helps this brushwork look interesting is the layering of different media. You know, starting with that fat marker, then switching to a tighter pencil. And again, you can go about this with any app. Doing so really helps achieve that organic look and steers it away from looking digital. I don't mean to imply that looking digital is a crime against art or anything, but I do think that things that look overly digital tend to also look overly repetitive, which in turn has trouble capturing an audience. Anyway, so I'll make a new layer here and set it to multiply mode, and I'll go up to my favorites and grab this hard glazing brush. It's got a nice bit of natural transparency to it, really good for blocking out some quick values here. But the thing I like about this brush is if you prolong the stroke, you'll see the digital pigment kind of build up or dissipate depending on how you're moving the brush. Again, it's a textural quality that I think looks nice over the other brushes I've been using. Switching up to a charcoal brush now and just dialing in the grain here, that's why all the undos. Just throwing a bit of atmosphere behind this guy. I think it helps pop the sketch. I learned that little trick when I was doing live caricatures. But back to my pencil brush now, just to beef up some lines where I think it's needed. And we'll call that sketch finished. That was fun. Let's do one more. For this one, I'll stay in cartoon land, but I'll add a more realistic painting finish. So this will be sort of a combination of the two sketches we've done so far. You might recognize this guy as my green monster character, a character that shows up in quite a few of my paintings. I used a Conte stick to block in the drawing, and now I'm looking for some thick paint. I'll try a few options here. And eventually I find this palette knife brush in the Sargent section. And yes, I do enjoy that Painter has an entire section of brushes dedicated to one of my all-time favorite painters. Anyway, I've just flattened the layers down, and as I often do, I switched back to my pencil brush, which again allows me to refine the drawing and also add some harder edges. You probably noticed I go back and forth a lot. That is, I'll use brushes that are very expressive and a bit random, and then right after that I'll go back to a more reliable brush that allows me to draw more accurately. That's how I like to keep expression in the brushwork, but also stability in the drawing. So I'll right-click and convert this entire layer to a thick paint layer, and as we've seen earlier, that allows these thick paint brushes to interact with what's already on the canvas. Playing with this brush's settings a little bit to arrive at a thickness and texture that I like, and I like this brush enough to add it to my favorites. I do that simply by clicking this heart icon. So I'm playing with this brush here, and I like its behavior, but I want to change its shape and characteristics a little bit. So without knowing exactly what I'm doing, I'm just tweaking these settings. Each brush in Painter has a unique set of parameters you can control here, and it really does change the look of the brush while holding on to its original character. Another tip I have about getting good-looking brushwork is don't be afraid to start out with a mess. This sketch has been a good example of that. A mess is inherently uncontrolled, but it contains those abstract differences and contrasts that then help create interest. The only thing that's different here from my abstract exercises is in those exercises, I just let things be. I never really tried to control anything or create any particular effect. I was just putting material down and then afterwards taking stock of what happened and how things look against each other. In this painting, I have to exercise some control because I do want to create particular effects. For example, I'm getting an airbrush here, and Painter tells me I need to put that on a different layer, not a thick paint layer. But I'm using this airbrush only in the shadow areas to diminish some of that texture. I want most of the texture and thickness to be in the light. That's a brushwork aesthetic choice, and I'm making that particular choice because the eye tends to look at the light side for the most information, and if I know the eye is going to dwell on the light side, I might as well load it up with the most interest brushwork-wise too. Now, that's not a rule, that's just a thought that makes sense to me. Oh, and I'm not saying I invented this. Here's Mead Schaefer doing it like 60 years ago. So to thicken up that texture in the light, I'll use Painter's impasto brushes. These brushes are pretty neat. They mostly add thickness to the paint that's already on the canvas. So you're not really painting with this brush as much as you are sculpting paint. And the other neat characteristic about Painter is it remembers where you've put that thickness. So if you then switch to a brush that doesn't have thickness, like this 6B pencil here, the pencil will appear to travel over the clumps of thick paint. It's pretty cool. Flipping the canvas here to help check my work. And you notice I'm doing that thing where the monster reads as green, but I'm actually weaving together many different colors that are all related to green. And the different brushes helps that blending look interesting. And anyway, I think that'll just about do it for this one. Here's where I ended up with it, and that's about all for today. Thanks everyone for watching this video. If you want to try Painter yourself, you can use the link in the pinned comment to grab a free trial, or use that same link with the checkout code to get $100 off. Thanks to my patrons as always, and hey, happy brushwork!